You wake up before sunrise. The air feels different. The birds sound different. Even the light looks different. And somehow, without a clock, without a calendar, and without a single mathematical formula, your ancestors already know something important. Winter is coming. Or spring. Or the short season, when certain animals begin to migrate. Or the few precious weeks when a particular fruit becomes available. For most people today, knowing the date is effortless. You glance at a phone. You check a calendar. A device tells you exactly where you are in the year. But for more than 99% of human history, none of those things existed. No January. No February. No numbered years. No printed calendars hanging on a wall. Yet ancient humans still needed to know when seasons would change. And getting it wrong could be disastrous. Arrive too late at a migration route and the animals are gone. Harvest too early and the food is not ready. Prepare too late for winter and your chances of survival collapse. So how did ancient humans predict seasonal changes without modern calendar systems? The answer reveals something remarkable. Your ancestors turned the entire natural world into a living calendar, and they became astonishingly good at reading it. Imagine standing in a prehistoric landscape 50,000 years ago. You cannot look up today's date, but you do not need to, because everywhere around you, the environment is already giving clues. The first clue comes from the sky. Long before humans built observatories, they were watching the sun. Every day the sun rises and sets. That sounds obvious, but something else happens that is much easier to overlook. The position of sunrise slowly shifts throughout the year, day after day, week after week, almost imperceptibly, then eventually unmistakably. The sun that rose behind one hill months ago now rises behind another. The sun that once set near a distant tree now disappears behind a different ridge. For people who spend their entire lives outdoors, these changes become impossible to miss. Archaeologists have discovered evidence that many ancient societies carefully tracked solar movements. Some of the most famous examples appear much later in history, but they reveal a principle that likely began long before monuments were ever built. Humans noticed patterns, and patterns became predictions. If the sunrise reaches a certain point on the horizon, a particular season is approaching. If shadows become longer each day, colder weather is coming. The sky itself becomes a clock. But the sun was only one part of the system. The moon offered another. Modern people often think of the moon as decoration. Your ancestors treated it as information. The moon changes shape in a predictable cycle. New moon, crescent, half moon, full moon, then back again. Month after month, year after year. Many anthropologists believe lunar observation was among humanity's earliest forms of timekeeping. You do not need mathematics to notice repetition. You only need attention. And attention was one of humanity's greatest survival skills. Yet neither the sun nor the moon could tell the entire story. Because seasonal change affects something even more important. Life. The natural world begins to transform long before humans fully understand why. A certain flower appears. A particular bird returns. Insects emerge. Fish begin moving upstream. Trees develop new leaves. And every one of these events contains information. Today scientists call such seasonal biological signals phenology. That simply means studying recurring natural events such as flowering, migration, and breeding. Ancient humans did not have a scientific term for it, but they understood the concept perfectly, because their lives depended on it. Imagine living as a hunter-gatherer. You notice that a certain species of bird arrives every year shortly before the rainy season. The pattern repeats. again, and again, and again. After enough repetitions, the birds become a forecast. You are no longer simply observing nature. You are reading nature. The same thing happened with plants. Ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherers show that people often possess extraordinary environmental knowledge. Researchers such as Richard Lee documented how the Jew/Honsi of southern Africa could identify subtle ecological signals that outsiders completely missed. What appears to be wilderness is actually filled with information. A skilled observer can read the landscape almost like a book. Your ancestors likely did the same. A particular flower blooms. Several weeks later, a certain fruit becomes available. A specific insect appears. Soon afterward, fish begin migrating. The events become linked. One signal predicts another. Over generations, these observations accumulate. Knowledge becomes tradition. Tradition becomes culture. Children learn what their parents learned. Parents teach what their grandparents taught. And suddenly, an entire tribe possesses a calendar without ever writing anything down. Some of the most fascinating evidence comes from animal migration. For many hunter-gatherer societies, migratory animals represented an enormous food opportunity. But only if people arrived at the right place at the right time. Researchers studying prehistoric hunting sites have found evidence that ancient groups repeatedly returned to specific locations during particular seasons. This suggests something important. They were not wandering randomly. They were planning. To plan successfully, they needed to predict seasonal events before those events occurred. That prediction required observation. Not once, not twice, but across generations. Imagine your grandfather teaching you that when certain stars appear above the horizon just before dawn, herds will soon begin moving through a nearby valley. You learn the lesson. You survive. Then you teach it to your children. Thousands of years pass. The knowledge remains. This brings us to one of the most surprising tools in humanity's ancient calendar system. The stars. Today many people struggle to identify even a handful of constellations. For most of human history, the night sky was impossible to ignore. It was brighter, clearer, and infinitely more important. Ancient humans noticed that certain stars appeared during specific times of year. Others disappeared. Some rose just before sunrise. Others dominated the night sky during particular seasons. These celestial patterns became reliable markers. Long before written astronomy existed, people were already using the heavens to organize time. Archaeological sites, such as Lascaux Cave in France, have inspired debate among researchers about whether some prehistoric imagery may reflect astronomical observations. The idea remains controversial. But one thing is not controversial. Ancient humans paid close attention to the sky. Too much depended on it not to. The stars could tell you when winter was approaching, when migrations were likely to begin, when certain environmental changes were near. The heavens became a giant seasonal reference system. But perhaps the most remarkable part of all this is that no single person needed to understand everything. Knowledge was distributed across the community. One elder remembered animal behavior. Another specialized in plants. Another knew the stars. Another understood weather patterns. Together, they formed a collective intelligence. This is something modern people often underestimate. Ancient humans were not primitive versions of us. They were experts in a different domain. You know how to use smartphones. They knew how to read entire ecosystems. And their expertise was often astonishing. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner has repeatedly documented the depth of environmental knowledge possessed by traditional societies. The amount of information stored in human memory can be extraordinary, especially when survival depends on it. Consider what happens when modern technology disappears. Your phone battery dies. Your GPS stops working. Many people become disoriented almost immediately. Your ancestors faced the opposite situation. Their technology was observation. Their database was memory. Their search engine was experience. And because they used these tools every day, they became incredibly accurate. Not perfect. Nature always contains uncertainty. But accurate enough to survive. Accurate enough to prepare. Accurate enough to pass knowledge through hundreds of generations. Eventually, some societies developed more formal systems. Stone alignments, monuments, early calendars, agricultural records. But those innovations arrived very late in the human story. For tens of thousands of years before that, people relied primarily on the natural world itself. The sky, the plants, the animals, the weather, the landscape. Every part of the environment contributed information. Every part helped predict what would happen next. And perhaps that is the strangest part of this story. Your ancestors did not separate themselves from nature. They lived inside it. The forest was not scenery. It was information. The stars were not decoration. They were guidance. The changing seasons were not abstract dates on a calendar. They were living events unfolding around them. That relationship created a level of awareness that many modern humans rarely experience. Most people today know the exact date, but many could not tell you which birds arrived this week, which flowers bloom first in spring, or which stars are appearing above the horizon tonight. In some ways, we possess more information than ever before. In other ways, we notice far less. Your ancestors could not tell you it was March 21st, but they might know the migration schedule of local animals, the flowering sequence of dozens of plants, the position of key stars, the behavior of insects, and the weather patterns associated with all of them. That knowledge kept them alive. So how did ancient humans predict seasonal changes without modern mathematical calendar systems? They watched. They listened. They remembered. And generation after generation, they transformed the entire natural world into a living calendar. You wake up before sunrise. The air feels different. The birds sound different. Even the light looks different. And long before a modern calendar could tell you why, your ancestors already knew exactly what was coming next.